Okay. Let me first of all welcome everybody here. Nice to have a big crowd here tonight and on Zoom. Can you, somebody give me a thumbs up on the Zoom if you can hear me loud and clear? Good. Yeah. Okay. Right. All right. Now, tonight's topic, we set up a little group, Rabbi Wise, Rabbi Mendel, and myself, which we've called the Three Rabbis. A little WhatsApp group between ourselves to try and put on these little programs. This is the third one, I think, that we've done together. Somebody said that we should have called it the Three Wise Men, and then Philip said that we should call it the Two Wise Men and Me, which I thought was a little harsh, but there you are. Yeah, you don't even you're so over bottle, you don't even remember saying it. It was actually one of your better ones, Philip. Anyway. Tonight's title of this, since we are in the festive season of goodwill to all men, the title is should Jews be a part of the outside world, or should they be apart from the outside world? In other words, how do we as Jews relate to the non-Jewish world around us, perhaps less relevant to us here in Israel, but certainly I'm assuming that nearly everybody here is an Oleh, and therefore will have had experiences in Chutz La'aretz. Certainly when we're in Chutz La'aretz, and those of us who have family and friends still in Chutz La'aretz, this is relevant to them. How do we relate to the outside world? Now, I gave a talk a couple of years ago on Zoom on a Motzei Shabbat to the young Israel of North Netanya on the subject of Christmas and the Jews. Does anybody listen to that? Do anybody remember what I said? Yeah? Well, Jeff, you can leave now because can anybody remember the joke that I told then? Oh, that's good. It's because I'm going to, okay. My son, who's a rabbi in Australia, says that you can tell the same joke once every 5 years. You can tell the same story once every 3 years, and you can give the same drosha every week, and it's fun. So anyway, so there's straight after the Christmas holidays, first day back at school. Barbara knows the joke. First day back at school. Huh? Yeah, my father told me this joke. If I'd had a grandfather, he'd have told it me as well. But I'm going to tell it you anyway because I happen to like it. So there's the first day back at school. Teacher says in this multi-faith school, says to Patrick, the Catholic boy, and how did you spend Christmas morning? He said, well, we got up very, very early to try and see if we could catch Santa Claus. Didn't see him. But he'd been because we had a stocking full of toys there, and we played with our toys until it was time to go to church, and we went to mass and we did all the stuff you do there. And then we came back and we had Christmas dinner and we had all the turkey and all the bits and bobs that you have. And then afterwards we went to the tree and we opened our presents and we played with all our toys, and our parents looked on and with beaming smiles and said, thank the Lord for Christmas. Oh, that's very nice, Patrick. What about you, John, the little Protestant boy? And he says, well, pretty much similar, really. We got up early, tried to catch Santa Claus, didn't see him, full of toys, played with our toys, went to church, came back, had the Christmas dinner, and we played with the toys all afternoon, all our presents. And our parents were very happy, and they said, thank the Lord for Christmas. And what about you, Moshe? Says the teacher. So Moshe says, well, we also got up very, very early, but we knew we weren't going to see Santa Claus. And you know what? I didn't have a stocking, no toys, nothing. And we didn't go to church. But what we did do is we went to my father's toy factory and we looked at all the empty shelves. And my parents said, thank God for Christmas. So yeah, it's an old one, but you know, it's an interesting story, isn't it? Because how do the Jews relate to Christmas? And that's really what I want to talk to you about in the next half an hour or so. Most of the world this time of year, certainly most of the Western, certainly the Christian world, are celebrating the birth of Jesus. Whether he was really born at this time of year is debatable, doesn't really matter. In England, the monarch has an official birthday and a real birthday. So this may have been Jesus' real birthday or his official birthday. It doesn't really matter. They're celebrating. That's what they're celebrating. But over the centuries, the way that the Jews have related to Christmas has in some way been a reflection of the way society and the Jews interact. It's almost like it's a barometer of relations between the Jews and outside of society. So at various times in our history, and we'll look at some of them in a bit of detail in a minute, at various times of our history, we have been very scared of Christmas. It was a time when there was a particular penchant for killing Jews. It was a time where the Christians had religious fervor, and of course, we killed their Lord, according to them. And so that thrown into the mix, a potent mixture of alcohol, nothing else to do, and some scapegoat Jews, this is a recipe for a pogrom. And many pogroms started around this time of year. And so Christmas was a time of year for many Jews for many centuries. And we'll look again, we'll look at them in detail in a minute. It was a time, not a nice time. It was a time to be scared. As the centuries have gone along, we have changed our attitude towards it. And in the last maybe couple of 100 years, in some respects, we have adopted Christmas in many ways. There are many Jews, particularly in America, not so much in the UK, but in America, there are certainly a significant group of Jews who celebrate Christmas with a Christmas tree and the turkey and all the business that goes on there. And they see it not as a religious festival, but as a cultural American festival. It's an American extension of Thanksgiving, if you like, but it's seen not so much in its religious context, but in its commercial context. And of course, nearly all of us have adopted some of the customs of Christmas without even really knowing that. And that is when we give Hanukkah presents. Because Hanukkah was not a time traditionally to give out presents. What did you give out on Hanukkah? Hanukkah geld. And who did you give the Hanukkah geld to? No, originally it was not to the kids. The origins of Hanukkah geld is that at Hanukkah time, the children were given money to take to the Cheder teacher. Okay, the Cheder teachers were very poorly paid, if at all. And at this time of year, at Hanukkah, the idea was that they would come, the kids would come with some money from their parents and give it as a gift to the teachers. Purim is different because there, Purim, you've got the concept of mishloach manot. That's a mitzvah from D'Rabbanan. Yeah, but there's no mitzvah to give Hanukkah geld, right? It's not like Purim is a mitzvah to do mishloach manot. So the idea originally of Hanukkah geld was for the teachers. The kids then said, well, hang on a minute, we want a bit of the action. And so it started to be that the kids would get some Hanukkah geld and they would then use that for their own use to buy toys or sweets or whatever it was it wanted. And then with the commercialization of Christmas, which really started at the end of the 19th century, the idea of non-Jewish kids getting presents at the end of the year in the winter, the Jewish kids were, as it were, a bit jealous, and their parents thought, well, we can't let them miss out. And from there came the idea of Hanukkah presents. So we have, without even really knowing it, we have, as Jews, appropriated certain aspects of Christmas. So there are those who would say that we should have nothing to do with it, and we should be completely separate from this whole Christmas idea. I remember when I was at school, I went to a fairly orthodox school, and we weren't even allowed to say the word Christmas. You were just about get away with Xmas. Just about. Christmas. Yeah, Christmas. Anybody know what Christmas means? Christmas, yeah. But, right. Anybody know what that means? No, nobody knows what it means. Yeah, it's a derogatory term. It's a derogatory term. So we weren't even allowed to say it. Now, in order to understand why Christmas was such a negative thing for Jews back in the day, we have to understand the origins of Christmas itself. Now, we've said already it may or may not have been the birth of Jesus, but many of the Christmas customs grew out of the ancient Roman celebrations of the Saturnalia holiday. Saturnalia holiday. And this was a holiday for the Romans in which the normal, ordinary, moral and ethical behavioral rules of society were suspended. In other words, you could do what you like. Okay, there was orgies and all sorts of things going on there. And one of the pet games that they used to do on this Saturnalia holiday was to taunt the Jews. One popular pastime at this time of year was to force the Jews to run naked through the streets of Rome for the amusement of everybody else on December the 25th. On Christmas Day, Jews were made to run naked throughout Rome, and they would be pelted with whatever people had to pelt them with. Now, as late as 1836, okay, 1836, we're talking what, less than 200 years ago, the Jewish community of Rome petitioned Pope Gregory XVI, begging him to stop the abuse of the Jewish community on Christmas. Because at that time, as a sort of development of this Saturnalia hobby of abusing the Jews, rabbis were forced to put on clownish outfits and run through the streets of Rome whilst the spectators threw things at them. The only difference between that and the Romans was that they had clothes on, but they were made to wear ridiculous costumes. Pope Gregory refused to intervene. So nothing changes there. Now, during the Middle Ages, this was a particularly difficult time for the Jews, of course, in Western Europe. What was going on then was the Crusades. Now, the Crusades, of course, were the religious fervor whipped up by the priests to go to Jerusalem and to free Jerusalem from the hand of the infidel. Who was Jerusalem ruled by at that time? The Muslims. Okay. So the original concept of the Crusades was to go from France and England, started off in France, to go and journey through Europe to the Holy Land and free the Holy Land from the infidel Muslims. But while they were at it, they seemed it's a bit of a shame while we're going through Europe not to kill a few infidels as well while we're at it. And the infidels that they killed, of course, were the Jews. The Jews were attacked, raped, pillaged, and murdered during the Crusades. It was a very, very tough time for the Jews of Western Europe, particularly in the Middle Ages. And this was very common to have riots at Christmas during the Middle Ages, because again, Christmas is the time of religious fervor. And for Christians in the Middle Ages, religious fervor equals kill the Jews. Okay? It's equate because of why? Because the Jews killed our Lord. My father was the only Jewish pupil in a 1,500 pupil school. It was a Catholic school. And he told me that he was very often taunted that, you killed our Lord. He used to say, no, it wasn't me, it was the guys from Leeds. But that's what he was taunted with. And there are many other examples of Jews being killed and attacked during the Christmas period. In 1881, the Jews were blamed for a stampede in a crowded Warsaw church on Christmas Eve. how they can blame the Jews for a stampede in a church is beyond me, but that's what they did. And that ended up in incredible violence in Warsaw on Christmas Day itself. Even in modern times, Christmas has been associated with anti-Jewish sentiment. The Ku Klux Klan was founded on Christmas Eve. Christmas Eve in 1865. And of course, as well as killing many African Americans, the Jews were also a target for the KKK. And there was a lynching of a Jewish businessman in Georgia in 1915, which was thought to be the KKK. And after that, over half, more than 50% of Georgia's 3,000 Jews fled the state. In 1959, December 1959, that's even in my lifetime, there was a shul in Cologne in West Germany, which was daubed with swastika and the words Juden raus, Jews out. And that itself sparked a wave of anti-Semitism. So this whole Christmas time was, for many Jews, a very worrying time. And so what used to happen was back in and of course in Eastern Europe it was no different during the periods of the sort of the late 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th century in Eastern Europe, in the shtetl. Again, you have religious fervor, alcohol, and free time. It's a potent mix, and this is what happened. So what used to happen, and this is how customs, how minhagim developed. What used to happen was the Jews were waiting for the pogrom. They knew it was coming in December the 24th, on Christmas Eve night. They knew that this was coming. Let me just see if I can mute everybody here because it's got a bit of feedback. There we go. So they knew it was coming. So what did they do? They stayed up all night. Don't know what they thought they were going to do when the mobs came to their house and with fire torches and what have you, but they stayed up all night waiting for it. And so they were worried they were going to be burned, the homes would be burned and they'd be attacked. So they stayed up all night. But what they did was they turned the lights out. Why did they turn the lights out? Because one of the things that the Goyim accused the Jews of doing was black magic, okay? And especially on Christmas Eve night, the night that Jesus was born, the Jews were accused of doing black magic to be able to bring evil to the world on this holy night that Jesus was born. So in order that they wouldn't think that they were doing black magic, they had all the lights off. And of course, if you have all the lights off, what else can't you do? You can't learn. That's what most of them were doing all day long and all night long. They were learning, but you couldn't learn because they had the lights off. Because if they had the lights on, they'd be thought that they were doing black magic. So it became a night where no learning was done. There was another reason why there was no learning done on Christmas Eve, and that was because almost the flip side of that, particularly the Hasidim, and particularly Chabad Hasidism, have a strong belief that on this night, the forces of evil are very strong. And if we learn on the night that Jesus was born, it's almost as if Jesus will get the zechus of our learning. Almost like, when we learn the Ilui Nishmas La'abdil. So they said no learning at all. And Chabad, even to this day, it's not all Chabad, but there's still many groups in Chabad who do not learn. It's called, anybody know what it's called? It's called Nittelnacht. Nittelnacht. We're not sure what it means. Niti is Latin, and it's the same word as nativity. So the most likely origin for the word of Nittelnacht is that it's from the same word as nativity, the birth, the night of the birth of Jesus. Another possibility of the origins of the word Nittelnacht is that from the Hebrew, I think this is less likely, but it's the Hebrew, nittel means to be hung, like talui, yeah? And so Jesus was eventually crucified. He wasn't hanged, but nittel could mean hanged. But it probably comes from niti, from the nativity. So there's no Torah being learned on Christmas Eve. Even on Tisha B'Av, we learn. We don't learn everything, but there are certain things that we learn. On Nittel Nacht, there was no learning. My son in England made me laugh this year because he said to me on Christmas Eve, he said to me, Dad, don't forget, it's Nittel Nacht tonight, no learning. And I said, yeah, okay. He says, you know what, Dad? He says, I'm so machmir on Nittel Nacht that I don't learn the whole year in case I get the date wrong and it's Nittel Nacht. You got to hand it to him, you know. So that's Nittel Nacht. They don't learn, we don't learn. And what did they do instead? They ripped toilet paper. Yes, that's true. In the yeshivas, that's right. In yeshivas, I'd forgotten about that, but you're right. In the yeshivas and many other places, they spend hours and hours on Nittel Nacht tearing the toilet paper for Shabbos for the whole year. Right? They get all the toilet paper rolls and they sit there and okay, so that's one thing they do. What else do they do on Nittel Nacht? Okay, so Rabbi Weiss played poker. Yeah, cards. Cards was now the interesting thing about the cards and the gambling is that actually gambling is asur min Torah. But on Nittel Nacht they gave a heter because for the same reason. We certainly don't want to learn because we don't want to give zechus to Oisai Ish, you know, to that man, to Jesus. So if we do things, then maybe he'll get our averas as well. And they said, okay, you can play cards on Nittel Nacht. Okay, so I'm talking about a bit later on in the yeshivas and what have you. Those ones that had the lights off, they just sat there waiting for the attack to come. The other thing that they did was play chess. They played chess, and there's a very famous picture. I'm sure you've seen this, Rabbi. There's a very famous picture of the Lubavitcher Rebbe playing chess with his father-in-law, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, and I don't know, nobody knows whether that was taken on Nittel Nacht, but everybody says it must have been taken on Nittel Nacht because these two Rebbes would not have wasted their time playing chess any other time of the year except on Nittel Nacht. I'm not so sure about that because the Lubavitcher Rebbe was an absolutely top chess player. And I don't think you can do that just playing one a day. Maybe he could, I don't know. Anyway, that's Nittel Nacht. So Nittel Nacht is still something which is celebrated, if you like, is kept by certain people. Now, there's another thing that they did on Nittel Nacht. There was one thing that they did learn. Anybody know what they did learn? A special sefer called, anybody know? It's called Toldos Yeshu. Toldos Yeshu, okay? Toldos Yeshu, which means the generations of Jesus. And it's thought to have originated in about the 11th century. And this is an alternative history of Jesus. And it isn't a very flattering one. Okay, it's a collection of accounts of Jesus's illegitimate birth and his deviant behavior. And during that period of time, it was one of the most widely spread works in medieval Ashkenazic culture. And it reflected the disdain and the antagonism between the Jews and the Christians. The Christians were busy attacking the Jews. The Jews were not at that time physically able to resist that. So they did what they could do to get back at them, which is use their heads. And they learned and they wrote this stuff about Jesus, which was very unflattering. And that's what they disseminated. And that's what they learned on Nittel Nacht. The other thing that was off the agenda on Nittel Nacht was marital relations. Okay, why not? Not like Tisha B'Av. You want to concentrate? I thought you were going to concentrate on the poker. Yeah, now, marital relations were off the agenda because nobody wanted to conceive a child on this very inauspicious night. So that was out as well. Now, later times, after the medieval period, in Western Europe, it started to be different because the Jewish elite started to take on board after the so-called emancipation, such an emancipated world we live in. I don't think. I think today we've seen how emancipated we are. But this so-called emancipation came along and the Jewish elite, particularly in Germany, they took on the holiday symbols of Christmas. And it was very common for affluent Germans to pose for portraits with their extended families, like the royal family does, and have their Christmas photograph in front of their elaborately decorated Christmas trees. And this was very common in Germany in the late 19th century. In fact, there's another famous photograph of Theodor Herzl, together with the chief rabbi of Vienna, whose name was Rabbi Guderman, and he came to visit. Rabbi Guderman came to visit Herzl in his home in December, and he was very upset to see that Herzl had a Christmas tree. And there's actually a photograph of them with the Christmas tree in the background. It's not sort of, front and center, but it's there. You can see it in this famous photograph. And Herzl wrote the following. Theodor Herzl wrote, Guderman, didn't even say Rabbi Guderman, Guderman seemed upset by this Christian custom. Well, I will not let myself be pressured, but I don't mind if they call it the Hanukkah tree or winter solstice. And that made me smile a bit, because I remember when I was a kid being in shul one year, and the rabbi gave a sermon around this time of year. He'd obviously been to one of his congregants' house, and there was a Christmas tree, and he was outraged by this. And he talked about this idea of having a Hanukkah bush. And he called the Christmas tree the Hanukkah. He couldn't bring himself to say Christmas tree, called it a Hanukkah bush. And so it seems that he was in good company with Theodor Herzl. So sadly, we know what happened to these German Jews who tried to show that they were assimilated into German culture. Less than 50 years later, they ended up with all their brethren in the place that they never came out of. And so that was the sort of late 19th, early 20th century experience. Then along came the American experience, as we said before, and many in the early 20th century, many Jewish families, particularly New York and San Francisco, Boston and New Orleans, staged their own celebrations on the night of the 24th of December, incorporating both Hanukkah and Christmas, and they had both lots of symbols together. And this was basically done by Jews of German origin. There was a report here of the Sinai Congregation of Chicago, which was apparently an Orthodox organization. And it celebrated Hanukkah as follows. On December the 27th, 1878, in the issue of the Chicago's Jewish Advance, the fine synagogue was crowded with grown people and children. The Hanukkah tree was brilliantly illuminated with wax candles. The services commenced with the singing of the first stanza of the Hanukkah hymn by the Shabbos school children. So there you've got a shul, which was ostensibly Orthodox, mixing their metaphors, as it were. So we've talked about the Hanukkah Gelt, and so what do we have? We have this idea that Hanukkah is, for some people, something to be frightened of. For some people, it's to be embraced, and for others, it's something to just let it go by without making any fuss about it. I have a friend who actually, I have noticed, is on our Zoom tonight. Somebody from Manchester. I won't embarrass him by telling everyone his name, but I remember him saying that he, Dafka, on Christmas Day would only eat beans on toast or the like, because he was not going to have a proper meal on Christmas Day because it just didn't feel right. That was it. That was his way of, if you like, saying, Annette nodding her head there. You did that as well, Annette? Yeah. So that's it. It's a stance against Christmasization. Now, I came from a fairly traditional family. My family were Orthodox Jews. They weren't the most religious Jews in the world, but they were Orthodox Jews. And I recall, after my sister got married, before I got married, My parents were still working. This was a day when everybody was off, right? Everybody was off. So my sister used to make a family meal, right? We used to make a family meal and we used to go. I don't remember particularly whether we had turkey, we didn't have turkey, but we had a family meal. We didn't have a Christmas tree, we didn't have crackers, and we didn't have all that nonsense. But we had a family meal because it was one of the few times my sister didn't live in the area where she could walk to us on Shabbat. It was a 20 minutes drive away where she lived in a different part of town. It was a time when we could sit together as a family. And I remember when I got married, my wife, who is much more fabrent than I am, said, "There's no way. I'm not going. No way am I going. It's too much like a Christmas meal. I'm not going." And it sort of all fizzled out after that, and we didn't go. So there's all sorts of different feelings about this. And there were various interesting, I'll just finish with this now. There's a very interesting study that was done to show that the early generations that went to America adopted Christmas symbols far more than the next generation. By the time the second and third generations of American Jews came along, they had a strength in their own identity, a lot stronger. They didn't feel as the need so much to Christmatize their lives, and they had. And I think I got written the figures down here somewhere. Initially, there was something like 40-odd% in the first study, was in 1958, something like 40-odd% had some kind of Christmas symbol. By 1993, the same study showed that only 18% had some kind of Christmas symbol in there. So that's another interesting thing. So just to finish with, there is something that we can do to recognize that there is a holiday going on, and at the same time to demonstrate our separateness from it in a positive way. And that was something that I used to do when I was a junior doctor, working in hospitals. I and my Jewish colleagues always volunteered to work on Christmas Day and Boxing Day and New Year's Day, so that the non-Jewish doctors could have, as many of them as possible, could have the time off. And that was the same in where I lived. Many of the Jewish people used to go and volunteer in care homes, so that the care home staff could have the time off with their own families. It was a very positive way of validating their holiday, and at the same time making a statement for ourselves that we are not part of this holiday, but we recognize this holiday, and we can do something good which can come out of that, which is we can enable you to go and celebrate your holiday. It demonstrates that we're different. It demonstrates that we're not getting involved, and yet it's something very positive. It's part of Tikkun Olam, correcting what's going on in the world, and it's a very positive thing to do. And on the back of that, there has in recent years also been introduced Mitzvah Day at this time of year, where people are off, people are not working, and instead of sitting around and watching The Great Escape on TV for the millionth time, you actually go and do something useful. Go and visit, go and work in an old people's home, go to a soup kitchen, go and help people who are less fortunate. And that sort of mitzvah day has been organized by a lot of Jewish organizations, and it's a very positive way. And so I would answer the question that we posed: should we be a part of the outside world, or should we be apart from the outside world? The answer is both. We should be apart from it, but we should also be a part of it in a positive way. Okay. I have used up my allocation. I'm going to stop the recording now, and then we will restart the recording. Hang on a sec. Let me just stop this recording. Otherwise, I won't be able to do it properly. I will stop the recording. Okay.